But I think, Herman, we're gonna jump towards the next slide where we're gonna move more into the EcoVadis methodology.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe a short introduction, and I can quickly kick it off from my side. Obviously, I've been hosting quite some EcoVadis webinars already last year. So for some, not a new face to the EcoVadis webinar series hosted by Nexio Projects, but my name is Robert Smith. I'm the commercial lead within Nexio Projects. My expertise mostly is on ESG and sustainability strategy. And my focus area is mostly on Europe and the United States, commercial-wise. Furthermore, I have a background in commercial economics, ambassador of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, and working for Nexio Projects now a little bit more than 2 years. And then with me on the webinar is my colleague Herman. So maybe Herman, an introduction from your side as well.
Yep, thank you so much, Robert. Very happy to be here. And hello to everyone where you are dialing in from. My name is Herman Grubia. I'm an ESG analyst, sustainability consultant here at Nexio Projects for the last 7, going on 8 months now. I'm originally from South Africa. I've lived in the Netherlands for the last a good 8 years. Before that, I've been lucky enough to live and work in a few other countries. A little bit about my background. I have a Bachelor of Science in Management of International Social Challenges, as well as a Master's of Science in International Public Management and Policy. So a bit of a more public sector background. And to really understand where I'm coming from and my passion in sustainability, where it all started, is as well my internship at the United Nations, where I worked at the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, mostly coordinating the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm sure you're all very much aware of those. And with that, I would like to hop into the agenda of this webinar. So just to guide you a little bit through what we're going to be covering here. First of all, I will hand it over to my colleague Robert in a second to cover our points of view, who we are as Nexio Projects, why we have an authority to speak on this, and how we can help you. Then we're really going to dive into the core of the webinar to tackle the EcoVadis model, really taking you step by step, breaking it down as simple as possible, because we know when you hear the word methodology, it's often associated with complicatedness, complexity, and we're really trying to take away from that and make it as understandable as possible, going from registration all the way to when you receive the scorecard and how to interpret it, which is point 3, understanding the results. And of course, if there are any other questions that remain after the webinar, we will provide you with the needed information you can contact us with. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Robert.
Yes, thank you very much, Herman. And indeed, in this chapter, we're going to do a short introduction about Nexio Projects, some key partnerships that we have, and also for you, for the people who are not familiar yet with Nexio Projects, just a short introduction and the correlation between Nexio and EcoVadis. So Nexio Projects, international sustainability consultancy firm, and also the worldwide and certified support partner from EcoVadis. Besides EcoVadis, another key partnership that we have is that we're also one of the 20 global support partners of B Corp, and also a certified assessor for carbon footprint models for the Natural Capital Partners group. A little bit about Nexio Projects and our partnership with EcoVadis. We have done the exercise ourselves as well. Nexio was awarded with a platinum medal with 79 points last year. So what we say is we practice what we preach. We know the struggle, and we have gone through the exercise ourselves as well. So we know exactly where companies are struggling with the most with regards to filling in the questionnaire, understanding the scorecard, but also from scratch, as we are tackling more today, understanding the EcoVadis model and the methodology. Maybe some background on the partnership. Since 2018, we partnered with EcoVadis, which gives us unique insights in their methodology to support EcoVadis clients with the questionnaire and the submission. And in 2020, Nexio Projects became the only global partner of EcoVadis to support also with the implementation, to make sure that the policies, the procedures, the trainings from companies are complied with EcoVadis and international standards. So it's a short introduction about Nexio Projects and our partnership, key partnership for today with EcoVadis.
Thank you so much, Robert. And then now we would like to take this opportunity, now that we have both introduced ourselves as speakers as well as Nexio Projects as a whole. Some of you who may follow us on the social media, such as LinkedIn and other platforms, might have seen we've gone through a rebranding recently. So we'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to our new mission, vision, and some values that are related to that. So as you can see, starting on the left side with our vision, we decided to go for a vision that's a little bit different than usual. And you can read here, ... in an abundant world. So to explain the thought process behind this vision, the reason why Nexio Projects chose this is that we believe in an abundant and bright future, and that this can only be achieved through collective, inclusive, and diverse approach. So really what this means is we want to, each of our individuals here at Nexio Projects wants to contribute to this shared vision by having our own individual visions as well that we can pursue with passion and understanding. So to give you a little bit of a personal example, my own vision that I'd like to bring to the table is tackling global disparities through fostering sustainable development in an abundant world. So just to give you a little bit of an understanding. And of course, this relates to our overall mission, which is supporting organizations on their journey from compliance to purpose. So we really want to take clients on this journey together. Sustainability is extremely vital, of course. We want to move away from this check the box approach to a more purpose-driven, purpose-led, really embedding it into your sustainability strategy and not just, again, like I said, ticking the boxes. But I have some interesting statistics to share with all of you, of course, before we dive into the methodology to set some context. So as you can see here on the slide presented, a good note to remember is that we will be sharing the slides with you later on. So I'm not going to go into each of the statistics, but if you are interested, you can go and read them up later after the webinar once we send them to you. But I would like to highlight one or two just for you to digest in the background while you listen to the rest of the webinar. So the first one is that 92% of companies are adapting their business strategies and models to be more sustainable and plan to increase investment in sustainability. I'm sure to a lot of you, this is not very surprising. Sustainability has become much more discussed within companies, also on the international level. So this just goes to show you that it is indeed true, and it is something to consider moving forward in your operations. And to kind of give a monetary support to this claim, the next statistic is that $649 billion has been poured into ESG-focused funds globally during the year 2021 alone. This is setting a new record for ESG-related investments, and it really just goes to show you that companies and investors alike are valuing ESG, valuing the benefits that it brings not only to your quality of your organization, but also to the benefits of the strategy that it can help you develop. So now, before diving deeper into the EcoVadis methodology, I'm going to launch a little bit of a poll. So please, engagement is key here. We really want to see what you guys think and take some time to answer it. I believe the poll has been launched.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So indeed, yeah, maybe the poll really is to see if, from the participant perspective, if your company already has done an EcoVadis assessment. So the answer is we don't have a medal, but it can also mean that you're planning on. But that is more the last option. And then obviously the different medals within the EcoVadis platform that you obtained. I don't know, Herman, I think you can see the live results. How are we doing? How many responses do we already have in?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. They're coming in extremely fast. We're at around 60%, so I'm just going to give it a few more seconds. Really loving the engagement so far. There's going to be a few more polls, as Robert explained earlier, so would really appreciate if you guys keep up the enthusiasm moving forward as well. So we'll just give it a few more seconds to get those last ones in. Okay, perfect. I think that is good enough. So right now, I will then share the results with you all. So as you can see here, 10% have said that they do have an EcoVadis assessment, but they do not have a medal. The largest percentage you can see on your screen is that 27% saying that they have a silver medal, which is already very impressive. And later on in the webinar, Robert will break down each medal and the scoring system as well that's related to it. And perhaps interestingly enough, we see that 9% have platinum medal as well. So very well done in regards to that.
I think also amazing to see, Herman, that those companies who already have platinum, which is 15 today in the webinar, I think there's even maybe a record of platinum medal holders that are joining the webinar, that are still willing to learn more about the EcoVadis methodology and also to improve their overall sustainability performance. So also special welcome, obviously, to the platinum medal holders on that sense.
Yep, for sure. That's super impressive. And for those who are already experienced with the EcoVadis assessment, we're hoping to answer any of those doubts, clear up any misunderstandings and any questions you may have. Those who have never done an EcoVadis assessment, it's also perfectly fine. We hope to break it down in a simple way so that you can understand exactly what you will perhaps be getting yourself into. So without further ado, we will get into the main content, which is the defining sustainability and the 4 pillars that are related to EcoVadis. So EcoVadis really structures the assessment based off of these 4 pillars presented in front of you. So you can see environment, labor and human rights, ethics, and sustainable procurement. So further breaking these down, starting with environment on the left-hand side, you can see 2 sub-themes, one operations and one products. So just going quickly through, you can see in the operations within the environment pillar, EcoVadis considers aspects such as energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, water, biodiversity. So for example, if your operations have an influence on the natural world around you, so the plant and animal life, for example, then local and accidental pollutions, you can think of different spills that may occur. And then lastly, for operations, materials and chemicals and waste. Then for products, you have product use, product end of life, customer health and safety, and environmental services and advocacy. So for this one, you may be thinking that it's maybe not the most clear of the bunch, but with environmental services and advocacy, this is really showing that your company is participating in advocacy outside of your operations. So really you can think of perhaps planting tree initiatives, for example, or contributing to the environmental community around you. Then moving on to the labor and human rights pillar, of course, you can think of human resources as a very vital aspect of this, where your common topics such as employee health and safety, working conditions, social dialogue, and perhaps interesting to clear up here, with social dialogue, EcoVadis really means for example, employing employee representatives, allowing employees to join representative bodies, labor unions, participating in collective agreements, for example. These are different versions of social dialogue. Career management and training as well. And then moving on to human rights, a bit more of an externally oriented aspect of labor and human rights. You have child labor, forced labor, and human trafficking. 3 things every organization will definitely want to avoid popping up in their operations. Diversity, discrimination, and harassment, and external stakeholder human rights. So this is, again, similarly to the environmental services and advocacy, a bit more of an externally focused initiative where you participate in initiatives upholding the human rights in the community around you, for example. Moving on to the ethical pillar, you of course have corruption, and corruption is a very broad topic. So you can think of different aspects such as fraud, bribery, money laundering, as you can see, anti-competitive practices, responsible information management, which can be broken down into data security, information retention, and topics similar to this. And last but definitely not least is that of sustainable procurement. So really all environmental and social practices that is related to your supply chain and your suppliers. And this is becoming much more important and noticed because, as many of you may know, that greenhouse gas emissions, a large part of this, depending on your operations, do come from your suppliers. So this is also very much relevant within the EcoVadis assessment. And with that, I will pass it on to Robert to kickstart the explanation of the EcoVadis model.
Great, thank you, Herman. Indeed, let's dive deeper into the EcoVadis methodology, where I will kick it off with just a small step back on the EcoVadis model. How does it work? What are the benefits of EcoVadis? As you see here, you see a couple of points, but just from my side, as an explanation, to take a little step back about EcoVadis. EcoVadis, the goal of EcoVadis is to create a universal scorecard where companies can showcase their sustainability performance towards their suppliers, towards their partners in various tenders. So EcoVadis is actually a sort of an umbrella rating where you can measure your sustainability performance as a company. And it is not where often the confusion is, another certification. you can upload the various certifications that you have obtained as a company within the EcoVadis rating. So EcoVadis is really an umbrella rating where you can measure your overall sustainability performance and where you have a universal scorecard on all the pillars of sustainability on how you score. And with the results of your scorecard, you're being benchmarked to the other companies in the industry you've selected on the platform, etc. So that's a little introduction on the EcoVadis model, and obviously there are quite some benefits on EcoVadis which are reflected here in the slide as well. Maybe Herman, we can go to the next slide where we will deep dive a little bit more into the EcoVadis model. Indeed, you already switched it. So the EcoVadis model. So these are the main 4 steps of the model, and we're just going to walk through them step by step. The first one is you have to register online. So you need to onboard your company on the EcoVadis platform. An absolutely crucial phase where we see, I'm sure Herman knows this as well, with our clients, we see it a lot that the onboarding didn't go correctly with regards to selecting the right entity or the right specific office, the type of assessment. Do you want to do a groups assessment, an entity assessment? The industry, is the industry really reflecting your business's operations? Absolutely crucial elements, because after this onboarding, the questionnaire that you get is, for example, based on the industry that you have selected in this onboarding phase. Also, you are being benchmarked with companies who are in the same industry. So for example, to pick one from the onboarding program within EcoVadis, selecting the right industry is absolutely crucial in this step 1 where you need to register your company on the platform. And at Nexio Projects, we are also happy to help and give you some guidance on that. But this is an absolutely crucial phase. After you have registered your company on the EcoVadis platform, it's time to answer the questionnaire. So the questionnaire can vary in size, depending on your company size, from a couple of questions per pillar to in total 100 to 150 questions divided on the 4 pillars of sustainability, which Herman just explained. EcoVadis is 100% evidence-based. So all the answers that you give in the EcoVadis questionnaire needs to be backed up with evidence. So to just give one example, if your company has solar panels on the roof of the office where you're located in, there needs to be a specific type of evidence that showcases that those solar panels are on top of the roof of the office, or even maybe an invoice of installation. So that it's very evidence based, since there's no physical audit in the EcoVadis process, and it's a 100% online self-assessment. After you have filled in the questionnaire and you have submitted the questionnaire on the EcoVadis platform, there's an expert analysis where an EcoVadis analyst will deep dive into your questionnaire and will reflect the findings in a scorecard. And this scorecard is your final rating. And that rating is reflected in most of the times a medal, where the medal now starts from 47 onwards, 47 points onwards. So it can also be that you score below 47 and then you do not have a medal, but you always have a scorecard where you see how you scored on the sustainability performance. But in your scorecard, your sustainability performance is reflected. You see your benchmark results, you see the trends in your industry. So it's your scorecard is really the final result of your EcoVadis assessment, where you can share your scorecard with your clients, your partners. You can request other scorecards from your suppliers, for example. And that is more or less the EcoVadis model. So it has 4 main steps: onboarding your company, answering the questionnaire. EcoVadis is going to do an analysis on the questionnaire that you filled in as a company, and then comes back to you with your sustainability rating. So this is really step 1, the EcoVadis onboarding process to register online. To deep dive a little bit more. As I said, the onboarding phase is absolutely crucial, and we wanted to also give an example by materiality comparison. we always make the comparison in the sense of, from a Nexio perspective, we as a consultancy firm have also done the EcoVadis assessment, as I said in the beginning of the webinar. And for us, the weight is not too much on sustainable procurement, obviously, as a consultancy firm. We don't buy too many things. I think pens and laptops are the most common things from our perspective, Herman. And comparing that, for example, to a transportation company, there's a totally different weight within the field of sustainability. So from a Nexio perspective, when we onboarded ourselves, the weight on the sustainable procurement part was not too much. But for example, on the labor and human rights part was almost to the maximum. And if you compare it to other companies who do buy a lot of elements, for example, in high-risk countries, the weight on sustainable procurement is higher on that sense. So here you see also how important it is to select the right industry so that the weight on the different pillars is also in correlation with your business activities.
Thank you so much, Robert, for that clear explanation. Hopefully you guys now have a better understanding of start to finish. Now we will really dive into each one of these steps that Robert has explained, kickstarting it off with the core of the methodology, really, what EcoVadis is looking at, what kind of different aspects they're looking at. So I would like to explain that to you all. You have three different aspects here you can see on the screen: policies, actions, and results. So I will go through them one by one and hopefully clear them up for you, as oftentimes when we see clients going through assessments, there is some confusion with exactly what they interpret to be policies and what they interpret to be actions and what EcoVadis expectations are. So starting on the left-hand side with policies, these are really, you can think of your formalized documents, these overarching, a bit broader documents that really solidify the mission, value statements, the different principles your organization, your company puts forward. And best practice is to then, in these formalized policy documents, set those objectives and set those targets as clearly as possible. What we often see, and this is just to give you a little bit of an analyst's insights, I go through a lot of different documentation from clients, and one point of confusion that comes up or often is questioned is exactly, okay, what is meant by a policy? As many clients tend to say that they have a policy, but then in EcoVadis's eyes, this is a bit more interpreted as a measure. So a policy, really, the best practice is to have quantitative and qualitative targets and objectives in place. So you can think, for example, in an environmental policy, you would have, we want to have an X% decrease of our greenhouse gas emissions by a certain year. That would be an example of a quantitative target. Similarly, for labor and human rights, you can think in the labor and human rights policy, you could set a target. We want to have a health and safety training for 100% of our employees by a certain year. And these would all be valued very much by EcoVadis. These targets and objectives are very much important. So then relatedly, endorsements are another aspect of policies. And the most common examples you can think of really is where your company is ascribing or committing to an external CSR initiative or principle. You can think of the United Nations Global Compact. They have 10 principles. It can be as easy as becoming a signatory to the UNGC, where you say, you send a letter from your CEO saying, we as organization X, we are a signatory of the UNGC, and you commit and you then have this endorsement. Similarly, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations can be another example. You can then see that policies here has 25%. And this means that all of the policies that you submit to EcoVadis as proof, your documentation, your policy documentation, will contribute to 25% of the score at the end. So this is cumulative across all of the pillars. So your environmental policies, labor policies, etc. Then moving on to the actions, you can see here, this has a 40% contribution to the score. And if you think about this logically, it makes a lot of sense, because if we think of these three as a bit of an upside down pyramid, going from wide to narrow, policies are those wide overarching statements with objectives and targets. You move then a bit more specifically to, okay, we have these policies in place. How are we going to implement them in terms of procedures, in a concrete basis in our day-to-day operations? So this is why clients usually have many more procedures in place than they do policies. So this, of course, makes sense that it is a bigger part of the weighting. So for this, you can really think of any procedures in place that specify protective equipment that employees need to have to do certain tasks, for example, mandatory trainings. You can think of different whistleblowing procedures you have in place to report ethical misconduct. These would all be examples of measures and in the actions section. Similarly, certifications also fall within this and third-party audits. So popular certifications that you can think of as listed on the slide is the different ISO certifications. So ISO 14001, 45001. We will list some examples for your overview a bit later on as well. But you can also think of third-party audits conducted on your finances or your accounts, or even third-party audits on health and safety of your facilities, for example. These could all be uploaded as proof for the action section. And then last for the action section is coverage, one that is often also points of confusion for our clients. We see what is meant by coverage is the level of deployment or dissemination of your actions and certifications. So I think this is best explained with an example. Let's say that you as a company have multiple facilities across different countries, perhaps even in different continents. It's great if you have some sustainable actions or certifications in place at one facility, but this is not necessarily representative of all of your facilities. So what EcoVadis looks for in coverage is to see how you are internalizing and how you are manifesting these sustainable actions across your operations. So obviously, the more spread out it is and the more evident it is in your different facilities, the better, and the higher your coverage, which of course is a positive effect on your score. Then moving on to the last section, which is your results. And if I can use the metaphor of the upside down triangle again, it's really the bottom, the most narrow point. So once you have these policies in place, you have procedures to manifest them in your day-to-day operations in a more concrete and tangible basis. You then have your reporting. So you can think of the KPIs here, the key performance indicators. How are you reporting on those actions that are in place? How are you tracking this on a monthly basis, half yearly, annual basis? It's up to you. And how are you then using those key performance indicators to improve your operations and see where you can progress further in the future? And then lastly for this section is the 360 watch. Also, we will be covering this a bit more in detail later on, but this is another point of confusion, often exactly what this is. The 360 watch is an AI-based tool that EcoVadis uses to essentially scrape the internet to find different press releases, news cases, controversies, scandals that may have occurred within the last few years for your company, and to see what kind of effect this may have. So you can think of, for example, if there was an oil spill related to your operations, or if there was some labor and human rights abuses or misconduct, these things can be popped up if they were reported on or if they appeared in any database or trade union reports, for example. But we will explain that a bit further later on. So then moving on to the answering the questionnaire part. So you've done the onboarding, now you're answering the questionnaire. And as Robert already explained, the collection of supporting documentation is essential. EcoVadis is a proof-based rating tool and system. This means that you cannot simply just say, yes, we report on our scope 1 emissions and EcoVadis will believe you completely. No, you have to upload valid documentation that is then extensively gone through and analyzed by EcoVadis that proves that you do these actions so that you can get a fair and accurate rating across the board. So really each document is carefully analyzed and credited on the scorecard. And if it is deemed to not be relevant, then it will not contribute to your score. So then going on further, here is, as I mentioned before, the examples of some different certifications, initiatives and labels that you can think of across the different pillars. Please note this is not an exhaustive list. There are thousands of certifications out there, depending on your industry, depending on your location, etc. So these are just a little bit to get your brain flowing and to give you some inspiration. So again, you can see the most popular ones, the ISO certifications. You can also see FSC certification, and so on. Then moving on, how does EcoVadis rate their documentation? So once you have provided this document proof, EcoVadis then goes through the process to look individually, document by document, to really rate what kind of a quality of a document it really is. And they have a scale for this. So you can see here at the bottom with the rather bright orange insufficient, it is high risk, which means that you'll get very little score for this documentation. And EcoVadis most likely has found that there are no policies or tangible actions regarding CSR. So most likely this document is irrelevant for the question that you're using to answer it with, and will not likely contribute very much to your score. Then moving to the opposite end of the spectrum, this is where I hope everyone wants to be, of course. For example, advanced, this is where policies and tangible actions on major issues are detailed with implementation information available. So this is really providing this documentation that states you do something, but that also states exactly how this is manifested in your operations and explains and shows EcoVadis how you are implementing these different proof of documentation. So then here is the expanded explanation on the 360 watch, as I mentioned before. And like I said, it's an AI-based tool that scrapes the internet to see any kind of detail, any news press release from NGO databases, trade unions, international organizations like the World Bank, OECD, or even just news reports if something has happened. What is interesting to note is EcoVadis assesses these findings on an individual basis, and that it does occur per pillar. So as you can see displayed, there are different time limits for which these findings are considered. So for environment, sustainable procurement, labor and human rights, findings or any kind of scandal that pops up, for example, will only be considered for 3 years. So let's say something happened in 2017, a spill occurred with your company, an accidental spill. 2021, you should be good, and this should not affect your scoring anymore. What is important to note is for ethics, this is slightly longer at 5 years, as when you're dealing with cases of corruption and bribery, this is usually internalized in management processes of your company, and thus does take a bit longer to kind of not be considered anymore by EcoVadis. Then moving on to a little bit more, we're zooming out again to how EcoVadis approaches assessing your CSR management system as a whole. Presented in front of you is a graphic with 2 axes on the left and on the right-hand side. Starting on the right-hand side, you can see the 2 opposite ends being reactive and proactive. So starting with reactive, this is really where EcoVadis looks at your documentation and your approach to sustainability. And being reactive means that you're simply just being compliant with legal requirements, for example, or national legislation. You're essentially just ticking the box that you need to move forward, which of course it's fine, but related to Nexio's mission, of course, we're trying to move from compliant to purpose-driven. And I think this graphic is very illustrative of this fact. So then on the opposite side, you have proactive. So this is really where companies are going an extra step, going beyond the strict legal requirements and starting to do extra reporting. They're doing a bit more voluntary initiatives. So if we move to the right-hand side of the graphic, the left-hand side of the graphic, sorry, you can see the voluntary basis. So this is where you are going for those ISO certifications. You're investing a little bit more of resources and time into that. You're reporting based off of GRI standards, for example, and you're really embedding sustainability more so into your strategy and not just complying to laws. And this is, of course, viewed as very valuable for EcoVadis. Then moving on to the next step of the process, once you have then submitted all of your documentation and you click that submit button, which can often be very scary, wondering if you have everything included or not, it then goes into the EcoVadis experts' hands, where they then conduct their in-depth analysis on a document-by-document basis. And then to just recap a little bit based off of that, once they do start conducting their analysis, it is a multi-perspective approach where they not only consider your own internal policies, actions, and results, as I explained before, but they also really take external stakeholder interaction into account. So you can think of the 360 watch, as I mentioned. You can see if you have any collaborations with NGOs contributing to the community around you. Do your employees, are they present in trade unions? What kind of audits have you conducted? Do you have worker voice surveys? These kind of external or third-party aspects are also indeed included in the validation process. And then once this whole process has been completed, you then are presented with a scorecard. Of course, this is what we will be then moving on to next. The results are often as confusing to clients as the process itself, because it's a very detailed process with many documents, a lot of proof provided. So the scorecard itself is very detailed as well. And then we need to help you understand exactly what you're looking at so you can best and most efficiently use the results moving forward. Yes, and then with that, before we dive into that, we would like to launch another poll. So I believe you should be seeing the poll in front of you. And this one is, which theme of the assessment do you find most challenging? So again, please feel free to answer away and we will share the results with you afterwards. Again, it seems that everyone is still very engaged. So thank you very much for the fast responses. We will just give it a few more seconds. We're already at 60% answered and it's only been 10 seconds or so, Robert.
That's great, Herman. I think this is all very good. And as you all know, so we tackled now the first 3 steps of the EcoVadis model. So the onboarding, entering questionnaire, expert analysis, and now this is the final poll before we dive into the 4th phase of the EcoVadis model, and it's more your final rating and scorecard. But maybe before we dive into that, Herman, you can share the results. Very curious, I must say.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Robert. So now you should be seeing the results of the poll on your screen.
Yeah.
And very interesting to see that sustainable procurement is by far the majority at 48% of the challenging, followed by labor and human rights. That's quite interesting, don't you think, Robert?
It is very interesting though, and I think having these results, maybe also framing that towards the next slides, where we deep dive more into the scorecard, where you also see the different weights in correlation with these results, that you can make the link there, Herman.
For sure. Thank you so much. So thank you for everyone's participation again. And now we're getting to the final step, which is understanding the results, as we have mentioned. So now really, you have done the whole EcoVadis process. Congratulations. You have been awarded a medal, hopefully to your satisfaction. And then you are presented with a scorecard in front of you. So there's a lot going on. So let's just break it down step by step. As you can see, once you open the EcoVadis platform, you will then have a few different tabs. Currently, we have this sample. And I would like to note that this is the scorecard of an imaginary company. So not a real example, it is just made up numbers for the purpose of this webinar. So you can see here in the scorecard tab, we first have your overall score tab, which is out of 100. This company has achieved a 58, which also corresponds to the color coding you can see just above the numbers, which means that CSR performance has been confirmed and that there has been detected CSR policies, actions, and reporting in place. So you may be wondering, what are the black lines that are present on these different scales? And this is really the average industry score. So as Robert explained earlier, it's not only just a score for your own performance, but EcoVadis also benchmarks your company against other companies who have completed the EcoVadis assessment within your industry. And please note that this can vary. So for some industries, many companies do the EcoVadis assessment, there may be 500, whereas for others, your sample size will be a bit smaller, but nonetheless, you are still benchmarked against them. So you can see here that this company is performing above the industry score. So of course, that is very positive to notice. Then it also breaks it down pillar by pillar. So you can start here with environment, which is the highest score at 70 out of 100, which is very good and far above the industry average. And then you can see the other values of 50, 60, and 50 respectively for the other pillars. And as Robert mentioned before, important to note as well is underneath these scores for each pillar, it's the weighting. So each pillar has a weight determined by EcoVadis, where it really determines which pillar is most relevant for your organization based off of the industry, your size, and where you operate, your location. So here you can see the most, the one with 4 dots as the weighting. So the highest weighting is labor and human rights. followed by environment, and then ethics and sustainable procurement. So what is important to note here is that while labor and human rights may have the highest weighting and thus will likely have the highest impact on your score, it doesn't mean that you should just ignore ethics and sustainable procurement, for example. They all still contribute. And let's say in a very extreme example, and probably unrealistic, if you focus all of your time, energy, and resources into labor and human rights, but have completely no proof for ethics, this, of course, will not reflect positively on your score. So really, you should be focusing across the board. But this is really just a guiding indication from EcoVadis to show you in your industry what is the most important pillar based off of the kind of operations that you conduct. So then once you dive a bit deeper, you can click on each one of the pillars, and then it will give you a per pillar breakdown. As you can see here, it gives you a little drop box. So we are looking at the environmental pillar here, and per pillar, it then goes strengths, improvement areas, and the 360 watch findings, which we would hope will be 0, of course. But here you can see there is 1. So then to look at the strengths, EcoVadis breaks it down based off of the 3 aspects I mentioned and explained earlier: policies, actions, and not seen on the screen, but if you would scroll down on the screenshot, would be reporting. So to just give you a bit of an example, EcoVadis assessed this imaginary company and found that one of its strengths in the environmental pillar would be that it is a United Nations Global Compact signatory. So that is one of those commitments that I talked about earlier. So this was deemed as a very positive benefit and would give a plus to your score. In the action section, for example, it also was found that this imaginary company had ISO 14001 certification. So this is another example of an action that would positively contribute to the score and would be marked as a strength. Something that is important to note, however, is just because you may have scored a strength in this year's assessment, for example, does not mean that it will necessarily be interpreted as a strength in the future assessments. So there are many ways that this can happen. Maybe the most simple example is perhaps, let's say you have an ISO 14001 certification, but it expires in 2022, and you aim to do an EcoVadis assessment end of 2022, then what was a strength before will not be considered a strength as the certification is expired if you use that same proof of certification. Of course, if you recertify, then you should be all good. That's just a small example. Then if you move on to the next tab, the improvement areas. So really, this is where EcoVadis has identified you need solid improvement on. There are gaps based on your documentation that you provided. And this is classified according from high, medium, and low importance or priority. Something to just be careful of is that a low priority does not necessarily mean that you can just leave it be. It is also the consideration of what is complex for you to implement, what is complex for you to change. So a low priority example here is at the bottom of the screen, you can see that EcoVadis found no declaration of discrimination, harassment, no supporting documentation available. So really, this would be perhaps that you just didn't attach the correct documentation. If you have it in place, it would be as simple as attaching the correct documentation. So that would be quite an easy fix if you have those in place already. A high priority might be something that's a bit more complex to fix, something that's a bit more long-term, but will have a possibly greater impact on your scoring for EcoVadis. And then hopefully that has clarified that a little bit. And now we would like to launch another poll very quickly. So please bear with us and again, contribute, engage, let us see what you think. I'm very happy to see that although it's nearing the end of the webinar, it's still coming in as quickly as the beginning. So thank you very much. Perfect. I think that should be good. I will just quickly end the poll. So there you have the results. The highest value being 49% on how to improve my score is the thing that the majority of you want to learn more about. I think this is most common, isn't it, Robert?
It is the most common indeed. And we are also going to deep dive a little bit more in the next slides. how we as the certified partner of EcoVadis can support with that. But also, before we do that, we dive into the medals, and we have a new announcement on that as well.
Yeah, I will then move to the next slide.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Herman. As you see here, the EcoVadis medals that you can obtain as a company. So as we said in the beginning and a couple of times, your sustainability performance is reflected in a score. And if you score below 45 or 47, you do not have a medal, but you still have your scorecard with your score per pillar. You're still being benchmarked, etc., but you do not you didn't obtain a medal as a company. You see two lines because from the 1st of January 2022 onwards, so 13 days ago, EcoVadis announced that they have changed the scoring with regards to the medals. So before, bronze started at 45 and now 47. Same for silver, obviously you can see it's 54, now 56. Gold was 66, now 67, and platinum from 73 to 75. EcoVadis has announced it only 2 weeks ago, so this is possibly pretty new to a lot of you who are seeing this for the first time. But absolutely good to be aware of this, obviously, with regards to client requests and maybe the goal for the upcoming year. A good note, obviously, is that your current medal is not changing. If, for example, you have obtained in 2021 a silver medal at 54, you can still keep the silver medal until your score is not valid anymore. And it will not, of course, change to a bronze medal then. But from 2022 onwards, a score of 54 is then bronze. So just wanted to show you the new medal structure of EcoVadis and how this is going to look like from 2022 onwards, where the last change was in 2020, this time in 2022. So maybe, Herman, we see a pattern here that maybe every 2 years EcoVadis is going to raise the standards. But let's see for the next years. But from this year onwards, the standards are a little higher than for the last 2 years. So deep dive a little bit more on how we can support you as Nexio Projects. Obviously, we just saw in the poll reflected that a lot of you are still looking for some specific information on how to improve your existing EcoVadis score. As a certified partner of EcoVadis, we help companies 2 ways on how we can support companies with their EcoVadis assessment. On one hand, we help companies with the filling in of their questionnaire to make sure that we aim for the highest possible result. We do this by full support options to support with data collection, filling in the questionnaire, making sure that the right documents are linked to the right questions, filling in the comment boxes, submit your EcoVadis assessment, and even when your EcoVadis score came back from the EcoVadis analyst, we will deep dive into the scorecard together with you where the first improvement areas are lying. On the other hand, with regards to the filling in, we also do final checks. So for example, if you say as a company, we know how to fill in and to gather the data from our side, but you would just like to have a final check from a certified EcoVadis partner, we can also do a final check before you submit your yearly assessment again. On the other hand, we also work with companies who just got their EcoVadis score back and are not per se satisfied with the scorecard. On that sense, we do ESG gap analyses where we help companies with clarifying the feedback from EcoVadis, screening the EcoVadis scorecard, look into the feedback from EcoVadis, look into the documents, the policies, the procedures, the trainings, all the types of evidences that you have uploaded in the platform, and how can we make how can we identify the different gaps in your sustainability management system to work towards improvement. And after identifying those gaps, we even have an implementation team where Herman is also part of, where we can implement the identified gaps from the first phase. And obviously, as you can see on the right side, we also have a sustainability training program where we can train your team, for example, who is filling in the EcoVadis assessment on a yearly basis. Just as a side note, besides the EcoVadis support, Nexio Projects also supports on climate-related projects, as you can see, but also more on the reporting side. Obviously, it's January reporting season, where we also support companies with their sustainability annual report, for example. But we can move to the next slide. Before we move towards the live Q&A, where I see we already have 30 questions, Herman. So I think we can better, also looking a little bit, keeping in mind the time, we can move towards the Q&A. But just before we jump into the Q&A, we just want to do one more poll. If there are any specific services where you are looking for as a company already in the coming months, this is the moment to let us know, obviously, where we can potentially support you with in 2022. So as I said, this is an EcoVadis assessment review, so more a final review before submitting. The gap analysis, as I explained, with clarifying your corrective actions, identifying the gaps in your sustainability management system to work towards improvements, full EcoVadis assessment support, or maybe carbon services from our climate team. How are we doing with the answers, Herman?
Yeah, they're coming in just as fast. So thank you again, guys, for the participation. I will give it a good 10 more seconds before we can move on so we can answer some of your very important questions and hopefully clarify any gaps or misunderstandings. And I think that is good. Thank you very much for answering the poll. We won't be sharing these. This is, as Robert has said, just for our own education, how we can perhaps be of service to all of you. So thank you very much. And then we will move on
to the live Q&A.
Yes, so I will then stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, that's totally fine. All right, I see still that there were a couple of questions also in the chat box, by the way. I've messaged a couple of times to please upload the questions in the Q&A box. So if you have not done that yet, please transfer your questions from the chat box to the Q&A box so that Herman and myself can also answer your questions in that sense. Maybe a first question from Ulrika. My question concerns requests from other parties to see our scorecard. Why is it automatically approved if I do not do anything? Wouldn't it be better if I don't do anything, the request is not accepted? It is indeed a new feature within EcoVadis that if a company is asking to look into your scorecard, it is automatically accepted from an EcoVadis perspective to keep the sustainability part as transparent as possible. EcoVadis as a tool is already obviously a very transparent tool where you have to submit evidence from your company to showcase your sustainability performance. And this new feature from EcoVadis, indeed, Ulrika, automatically gives companies, if they request access to your scorecard, but you can always on a later point decline the access from your perspective if you would prefer to not share your score on a later point. We look into the next question from Derek. Maybe you want to answer that one, Herman?
Yes, would you mind reading it out while I find it?
Yeah, of course. It's on the top, it's upvoted with 5 thumbs up. With so many questions and being evidence-based, why do you only get to upload a maximum of 55 documents?
That is a very good question, and also quite a common question that we get. And the answer to that, Derek, is that from EcoVadis's perspective, that the 55 maximum document limit is exactly there to show that a company that has sustainability integrated into their strategy, into their processes, should have it as centralized and as consolidated as possible, and that in their perspective, if a company is strong in sustainability, it should be able to prove it in even under less than 55 documents. So really, the less proof you have and the more consolidated your sustainability strategy, the more concise it should be, and the less documents you should be uploading.
Perfect. I see Derek also responded in the meantime. So hopefully that answered your question, Derek. And if it's really a struggle for the company and you're not figuring out how to reduce those companies, we're also happy to help you on that one, just to check how we can maybe combine certain elements, etc., to make sure it's aligned with the EcoVadis methodology. I see Frank with the question that is always in the Q&A, and that is, will you be supplying the presentation to all attendants? Yes, our marketing team, Margarita and Anja from our marketing team, will make sure that you receive the presentation afterwards. So it's coming your way as well. Do you want to tackle the next question again from Jeroen, Herman? I don't know if you can see it, otherwise I can read it out loud.
Yes, so the question from Jeroen is, with limited number of files allowed for uploading, how do you propose to overcome this in case you exceed the threshold? Combine policy, procedure, actions, and KPI files for different company sites and locations. This is a very good question, Jeroen, and it's something that I myself as an analyst encounter very, very often. And there are a few ways you can approach this. Really, the first one is to kind of discern which documents are really showing the best proof, which ones are answering the question exactly what is necessary, but at the same time, if you really, after going through your documentation, cannot narrow it down to underneath the threshold, it is indeed possible to merge some of your policies or your procedures, especially if they are similar. So for example, what we see often is for the pillar labor and human rights, the health and safety, different kind of procedures you have relating specifically to health and safety. We do see that in some occasions, you can indeed merge these health and safety procedures to then reduce your documentation that you upload drastically. But this is not always represented because exactly of the question that I answered previously, that the less documentation you provide that speaks more, the better. So this is really, I wouldn't say last resort, but if indeed you cannot cut it down or consolidate it more, then you can indeed take that approach to merging. Thank you very much for your question.
Great, thank you, Herman. I'm scrolling a little bit down, so I'm gonna pick more also some other questions, obviously. One from Karen Witten. Thank you, Karen, for your question. Is when do they update, release new questions? From this year onwards, new questions are added in most of the questionnaires, and every year the questionnaire is updated from an EcoVadis perspective. But this year specifically, there are more questions added, for example, on the environmental part, in almost all the questionnaires for all the industries. So more on the emissions, and also on science-based targets, for example. But EcoVadis updated the questionnaire beginning of the year, so in the last days. Let's see, let's pick a couple of questions still, Herman. I see, also looking at the time, obviously.
Yeah, perhaps I see one from Amy Hickman, who asks, can we see how our submitted documents are rated in the platform? Indeed, you can, Amy. You can see how they are either strengths or improvement areas, as I explained before. And you can see also how I explained the document rating system. Documents are also shown when they have been rejected by EcoVadis. So then you can see, okay, this document was not accepted, and then there will indeed be an indication of why. And then you can really use that rejection or even the strengths and improvement areas, as I explained before, to then tackle your next assessment to see, okay, what can I improve upon? What can I change? Which documentation can be different next time around?
Great. Thank you, Herman. I hope that answered your question. I see a next question from Gabriel, which is actually a nice one as well. Does the 360 analysis takes into account positive findings besides scandals as well? And absolutely true. So obviously, you can, in the 360 watch, which Herman explained in very detail, also positive findings can be detected and have a positive influence on your score as well. So for sure, good question, Gabriela. Do you maybe want to tackle another question from your side, Herman?
Yes, let me see. If you have one in mind already, Robert, please feel free to shout it out while I scroll through.
Yeah, I can forward one from Ellen. Also great to have you on the webinar, Ellen. Will EcoVadis credit us for our KPIs that we are not reporting externally?
I believe, yes, they will. Reporting is also considered when it is internal. You do not necessarily have to only share your external reporting. It can really just be that reporting that you have for yourself, those accident frequencies that you track internally, for example, for labor and human rights, or your number of times your whistleblowing procedure has been used. These are the kind of things you don't really always share externally, but you do internally, and these will 100% be considered by EcoVadis and will help improve your score if you attach appropriate proof. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Herman. And indeed, I totally agree. I see maybe one last question, looking at the time. Obviously, we also want to respect your time, is from Tony. Can we have access to the questionnaire for viewing prior to filling out and completing? I can tackle this one. Unfortunately, it's not possible to already look into your questionnaire before filling out and completing. So when you request a questionnaire from an EcoVadis perspective, directly you will have a number of weeks to complete the questionnaire from your side. I think one of the benefits, for example, with working with Nexio Projects is that we can extend your deadline with a couple of weeks if you would need some extra time. But unfortunately, it's not possible to, for example, now request your EcoVadis questionnaire and only submit end of summer. There's always a certain time frame where you will need to fill in the assessment. But thank you for your question, Tony. I see still, Herman, that we have 33 questions, but we also want to respect your time. Something from my perspective, what I'm going to do is come back to you with the ones with still an open question, where I can still discuss your case a little bit more in depth. And I will also post my meeting link in the chat box. So if any of you would like to have a more deep dive discussion on your sustainability case, on your EcoVadis assessment scorecard, or is looking for specific support already, please don't hesitate to use the link to already plan a meeting with me where we can discuss your case a little bit more in depth. But for the rest, I want to say thank you again for joining. It was an absolute pleasure from our side to host this webinar again. I hope the webinar was insightful for you, that we could have answered your questions, and otherwise we will definitely come back to you to still have that discussion on your question. But from my side, very grateful to have you all on the webinar again, and hopefully see you on the next one.
Yeah, and completely echoing that as well. Thank you so much for everyone's active participation and engagement. We hope to keep in discussion, keep in touch. If you need anything, please reach out to Robert. And thank you so much for your attendance, everyone. And have a good rest of your day.